So this platform is both an attempt to hone in as well as expand. So one of my favorite comments or critiques of mine is that I get from other leaders and people. They say you try to talk about so much. So today I'm really focusing in on the courage that vulnerability requires. And I start with that to say, because I think, and I try over and over to speak about this topic, because this, in my mind, is the central topic of ethical culture in terms of how do we do well in relationship. If there's anything that ethical culture means to me, it is that as a community, we believe in the transformational power of relationships. So I wanted to share this with you. This is a poem I wrote, and it's meaningful to me for two different reasons. One is the first poem that I ever had published. Two, it represents something that I want or wish could happen, or something that I yearn for, and it came out when I wrote it like a breath, and it's in haiku, so it feels even more just beautiful when you write a haiku basically in the form as it comes out. It just feels like the championship of writing. So it named something for me that I wanted to experience and I want to experience. So it's called Clay. And Billy, you can put it up if you can highlight. Lovers, eye to eye we lay. Sorry. Lovers, eye to eye, taking turns between molding and being clay. I'm going to read that one more time. Lovers, eye to eye we lay, taking turns between molding and being clay. There's a slash for being clay. So, and so for me, this poem recognizes something I try to teach my students about, which is the kind of equalness of a relationship. Because both lovers are they're laying down, they're eye to eye. No one's taller than the other. They're on the same level. They have the same amount of power, in theory, and they're taking turns. So there's this aspect of reciprocity, and then there's the molding and being clay, right? So it's both owning the kind of power that we have when we engage with people in an intimate space, and also being willing to be malleable, to be affected, to be changed. And that's not an easy thing to do. When I used to give this talk, I used to talk a lot about the reality of intimate partner violence, which can make being vulnerable actually, someone would feel being vulnerable can feel dangerous, right? As we're aware of the risks of it takes of that vulnerability requires. The stakes, not even that stakes being that high, right? It still puts one in an uncomfortable position. And I can acknowledge that and I can recognize that because I see it in myself. It is something I struggle with. And I want to make sure as I talk to you and I talk about bravery, I want to be clear that I have had brave moments. 10 years ago, a little bit, actually 12 years ago, on the trolley, the streetcar in Philadelphia, and there was a young woman who had a bag. She was just riding the train, so the bag was on her back. And there was a man who was using his jacket to cover up the fact that he was going and reaching for her wallet, which is on the outside, far out pocket. And mind you, this is a crowded trolley car. And I said, yo, what are you doing? And I'm 2 feet away from him, my face to face, right? And I tell her, close your bag. Right? So I wanted to prove to you, I had brave moments, but I'm also a coward because there are many times that I've been unable to sit in that space that vulnerability requires. I have avoided being seen and fallen for an image rather than the person, rather than trying to see who that person really was or revealing who I am myself. I think it was Sopranos episode. If anyone's ever a fan of The Sopranos, he talks about a woman that he's interested in and started seeing on the side. And he tells this therapist, he's like, well, what do you like about her? He goes, she's smart, she's cute, she's Italian. And it was so funny because this gangster figure, is in this moment, and he's like a child. And I think, I saw some familiarity in that because that's how I dot on someone that I have a crush on. Like my lines are different. She's smart, she's Black, she ignores me. That we're a little different. So I found that humorous, and come to find later that the episode, that's the sort of string of events, was used as a way to show a sort of pattern of behavior for Tony Soprano. And I feel like there are relationships that have been a reflection, or I could see or identify a certain pattern to myself. And so I wrote about it, of course, which is what I'm going to share today, another poem. And it's written in a particular style. It's called the Gazelle. And I'll explain more about it after the poem. Or see if you can notice some things. Space. What fills the void you create? So many things live and die in that space. You dance and drift and think that is grace. When you slowly glide away just to give space. You thought she understood when you left. It was an attempt to let her breathe, have space. Stretch the A and it doesn't feel so cold, like its own place, this space. You had to fight for so much. Now you fight a word or caress in the name of space. Sometimes you let go and your hips guide you into and past a soul, a space, a space. A moment leads you to a new object of reward, a fresh face that beckons the need to immediately take that space. Christian, if you didn't choke at the fear of grounding embrace, what would you learn to hear in that space? I'll repeat the last line. Christian, if you didn't choke at the fear of grounding embrace, what would you learn to hear in that space? So a gazelle is a poem that is self-addressed. The last line is meant to build to the last line where the writer addresses themselves through their name. It also asks you to repeat something, to ruminate on something, a word, and it comes multiple times in the piece. So I named that word, or the thing that I felt like I needed to name was this idea or concept of space. And my need for space is located in sort of stories that I learned to tell myself as a child. The stories that I learned to make sense of the difficult, tumultuous relationships around me. And I'm quite convinced that that story that I told myself was not just because of my families. Like when I think back to my parents and their inevitable eventual divorce when I was in 6th grade, and thinking, oh, it's probably better that they're not together. Where most children sort of, say, I wish my parents stay together, and or like the sort of are feel responsible for the breakup of a family. I felt relief. I also suspect that there's a way that racial oppression in its unique has had a resounding and unique impact on the ability of Black folks to be in healthy relationships. And I think about the things that my father learned to deal with stress, the things that the men in my mother's family learned to deal with stress, and the stories and the patterns of behavior that is reflected, I see that in me. So now I work as I mentioned, towards the prevention of intimate partner violence. And I try to own my social positionality, both as a Black man with educational social privilege, but of someone who's also witnessed and been connected to people who were in abusive relationships. So I speak with a certain urgency, both to young Black men and young Black women. So I try to be honest. So when I say that, and that urgency comes with the need to be honest with myself, right? And to be honest and to attempt to be honest in relationship, and hopefully that manifests in being honest and authentic in community. So I will own the fact that I didn't have faith in the ability of a relationship to be soothing or grounding. What I do is I try to offer service. I try to serve. But to be clear, to try to serve can be a cold thing without attention. It can be empty. Without presence, it can feel lonely. In that I tell myself, I can give this, but I won't ask for that. Or I can offer this, but I can't give that. As an attempt to not to burden or overwhelm or, I guess, take up space in another person's life. So I think as a person who can identify that these are a contradiction, right? That I have invested and chosen as a kind of vocation, a religion, a community that has faith in relationship. So what do I do? What do I do to try to address this contradiction in me, which while I believe in the power of relationships, I'm also incredibly fearful of what they require, how they might change me, or how I might change another person. One of the most interesting and refreshing ideas has been Adrienne Marie Brown's sort of an essay that Adrienne Marie Brown wrote about the use or the workings of flirting. Flirting is meant to reveal one's authentic self. It's not meant to show your best foot forward, hide desperately the flaws that you have, but as a way of engaging with play and consent, the slow unpeeling of who you really are. And to me, that seems, I don't know, it seems like an invitation, right? An invitation to say, I don't have to be ashamed of what I like, what I want, what I might need. I know personally, I do struggle to name what I desire. I struggle to say, I need help. I often don't tell people my love language. Is it words of affirmation? Which is, I would say, it's words of affirmation. Because it takes so long before I trust that you actually might want to provide those, or that I might believe them. So I would ask folks here to think about, what do they need in a relationship? What makes them feel like they're loved? Is it quality time? Is it physical touch? Is it gifts? Is it words of affirmation? Is it acts of service? What are the things that says love to you? And I say, I ask that because it's, as much as it's to identify within yourself, being able to identify or realize what that means for another person may be very different, right? Which I'll get into later. This brings me to this sort of exercise that I tried to do a few months ago with some folks online, which I really tried to get folks to identify their love ethic. What is the way that for them makes sense to articulate what they think love means? Because, spoiler alert, it can be different for everyone. I know that there are quotes for love that move me, and for others, they're like, oh, that's not her. So I'd like to offer things, a couple of quotes that I pulled out that mean a lot to me. So or that have stuck with me or challenged me. So I'll go back to the beloved quote that was the opening words. This quote comes at a very particular, interesting time in the novel, because the novel is also, it feels circular. There's a lot about memory. There's a lot about remembering and also trying to forget, right? Dealing with the grief and mourning. And there's this character from the past who expresses, who I will say this character is a slave, or is a person who is enslaved, and he falls in love with a woman. Well, I can't remember if she's also enslaved, but he has the ability to meet her, and he's tried to run away with her. And the characters asked him at some point, or somehow he expressed why this connection was so meaningful, why he would incur so much danger trying to be with this person. And he said, his name was Sixo, or is it seven? No, Sixo. She is a friend of my mind. She gathered me, man, the pieces I am. She gathered them and give them back to me in all the right order. I'm a big believer that part of what makes love and relationship meaningful is that it offers ways for us to build coherence. It offers us ways to understand ourselves and to see ourselves that maybe is not as possible or wasn't as possible before. I'll read a quote, another favorite one that I have, which is by Bell Hooks, when we understand love as the will to nurture our own and another's spiritual growth, it becomes clear that we cannot claim to love if we are hurtful and abusive. Love and abuse cannot coexist. This quote there's two pieces for me, which is the understanding that love is about nurturing one's growth. That to me is most resonant. I think when I approach relationships, I seek and I hope to foster a growth space. But then the other part, which is because I work with young people who are use this word, we say that, oh, someone's overprotective. Meaning for them, they know that they think that when someone's trying to control them or guide their lives or take away their decision-making, that it's meant to protect them. And even if it goes overboard, there's still the sense that central component is from a place of love for the other person. But rather, I try to get them to understand that if someone's hurting you as a means of keeping you close, then it's more about them than it is about you. And another favorite of mine, which is love itself, is in a certain sense hidden and therefore can only be known only by its revealing fruits. That's Kierkegaard. So love itself is in a certain sense hidden and therefore can be known only by its revealing fruits. There's something about that mystery, that uncovering, that there's no time element. We could say to a person, you could see a relationship and then come back tomorrow and say, have a sense like, what are the fruits? We come back 5 years, what are the fruits of this relationship? It's only something that can be seen in its impact. What's being done? How do people feel? How are people growing? So in the last one I'll say is love someone in such a way that that person feels free. This one is Thich Nhat Hanh. And I use this one in this talk because I remember a few years ago at a FEST conference, I was on cloud nine. I was with someone who I thought that this was going to be my last relationship. This was going to be the person that I got married at the Philadelphia Ethical Society with, and it was it. And we had this conversation about freedom. And I said, hey, like, if you want to talk to people, if you want to flirt with people, if you want to dance with people, go ahead. I want you to feel free. And she told me, she said, that being treated that way doesn't make me feel free. And so I had to learn, and what I wanted to share today, which is that even if we do come up with that love ethic, we have to be aware that that may not extend to the other person with the same understanding of what love means or what the words that that ethic means and how it fits with their ethic. So there's still some space or something has to be done to reconcile what are other folks' approaches to love. And so I say that because I want to, so this is an example that I use because these definitions can be so variant, right? And so I'm gonna ask Shannon, did you get a call? Shannon's gonna help me do something, right? To show something, right? Of like what I think being or feeling like in a relationship feels like. So I want to say when one does a squat, we do a squat, I say like, oh, I know that my heels have to be on the ground, right? My chest has to be up. Oh, these are right cues. These are good cues, right? Right? And so my weight, I want to keep my weight above my feet, right? So I can go down and then come back up. Shannon can do a better squat than me. I just want to say that, but like, it's okay. I'm wearing dress pants. That's the excuse I'm gonna give, right? But if I wanted to go to the ground with another person, right? Yeah. That would require me shifting where I understand the center of gravity should go, how I balance my own weight, how I account for theirs. And when we make agreements of how fast we're moving, how low we're gonna go, and we get to that point, all right, I lose that gravity. Now, Shannon makes this look really easy, because he's really strong and awesome. But thank you, right? But it's just imagining, right? Being in a relationship is a little like that. It's changing your sense of gravity. It's changing or a space where people are sharing that. And I know, and that's so part of what I sort of spoke about in the beginning of why it's so difficult to let go of the fear of what it means to be in partnership and relationship is because I didn't come from the most challenging childhood. My childhood had challenges, but those were not really of material ways. But there's this sense that I built myself. None of my family is like me. My niece actually went to liberal arts college, so that's not true. But we have differences, right? I'm the guy that's like got to go back to Ghana 3 times, who like has to do photography and video, and then come give talks to the Ethical Society in New York, and then go back to Philly. And I'm a little bit of I think of myself as a black sheep, and so I say, oh, like I made myself. I had to get comfortable with myself. But I also know that's not the whole story. That's not the whole story. Because there's many ways that the relationships that help me become the person I am. There are people who experienced love that gave me love, that allowed me to become the person I am today. And so I have to reconcile for myself these stories so I don't feel like a self, quote unquote, made person. But I'll say, so a relationship, getting back to that sharing of space, it's a co-created cultivation of a space that contributes to the growth of the people involved. And I think that's important because understanding that there are people who are keeping their individual selves when they move into the space of relationship. It is not a melding. It is not a a a releasing or relinquishing of the boundaries of the self. Now, people argue that the beginning of a relationship feels like so ecstatic and just amazing because it's the time when people actually do experience a kind of ego death where they let folks in because they feel this comfortability, this newness, these hormones and things flashing around. But that's a temporary state of being. It's not a sustainable state of being because at some point, someone's going to have to say no. Someone's going to have a boundary. Someone's going to have a way of protecting their individuality within the context of the relationship. We can talk about enmeshment another day. I will name family systems theory. I just was trying to be very targeted today. So forgive me for not. Or like come back to talk to me. Come back to hear me because we'll talk about family systems theory and enmeshment one day, right? So I find that it's important to describe that as a space because it's a space that we choose to step into. It's a space that we choose to say, this is going to foster the growth of both of us. And so in that sense, it's hard to experience that relationship if you're solely concerned with the self, or if you're only over concerned with the imagined other, which is someone I've been guilty of both. So for me, and I will say for Joan was very intent on making clarity where I was intentionally not clear about saying this platform was about romantic relationship. Because it is. But I do want to make the argument that we treat romantic relationship on a pedestal, and that has in ways contributed to our isolation as a society. That these relationships, we can sometimes have them exist outside of our relationship to community, outside our relationship to family. And this is why I am particularly drawn to and sort of curious and interested in, and give praise to folks like Jay, Storey, Elise, to folks in the polyamorous, non-monogamous community, because particularly for me, the concept of relationship anarchy, the idea that romantic connections don't take precedent over other forms of relationships. So whether that's friends, family, community, those relationships are seen as the same level. And I get why romance has its own gets its own area. It's the confluence of sex, these feelings of fantasy and things that we're fed in Western culture. But I feel like it also, again, contributes to our isolation because we pack and reserve for our partners so much expectation. I'm look forward to a day when the communal need in place for our romantic relationships is on the same level as the pedestal we give for our relationships in community, in friendship, and in service. So I look forward to when those are all looked at on the same level. I think of Sabufu Somé, who challenges the way that folks approach Western relationship. She says that many times in Western culture, people approach relationship at the top of the mountain. People date and things are going well, and it's like this honeymoon phase, and it's the hope is to cultivate that throughout the relationship. And Sabufu Somé says that's impossible because they're going to be downhills. There are going to be things that folks, when they encounter struggle, it's best to start at the bottom of the hill and have the community bring the relationship up to the top of the mountain. So it's, again, something that we can battle the isolation that is a consistent problem in our world today. So I'll leave that on the note of I think we need to intentionally think about how we and who we try to love, how and who we try to love. And we should be attempting and uh, cultivating love in many other different places, because I think it will inform how we can be in the world and how we have relationship, not only with our partners, but with ourselves and within community. So thank you.